Alright, Joshua, take
A
one.
little to your left. There you go. Thanks.
Okay, so first thing we do is have you say your full name.
My full name is Joshua Edward Wright.
Okay, how would you say, hi, I'm Joshua Edward Wright?
Say what's up. I'm Joshua Edward Wright.
Okay, great, great. And you're going to be looking at me when you're responding. Okay, so how long have you practiced yoga?
I've practiced yoga since I was in college, about like 2 years before my arrest, and I was arrested September 29th of 2014. So I would say 7 years? 6 years? Something like that.
How long were you practicing yoga with Living Yoga?
With Living Yoga, the entirety of the time I was in prison and since I've been released. So I went to prison in about January of 2015 at Columbia River Correctional Institution, and had to go through a process to become eligible to take Living Yoga classes on the inside. And that took about probably 2 months, and so I started March or April of 2015.
Oh, what type of...
We're going to shut the window real quick.
What type of program did you have to go through to be able to take the Living Yoga classes? You can just pause for a second as he settles.
I'm going to make it nice and stuffy.
More heat.
Yeah, sorry guys.
No one else is sweating as much as me for some reason.
Joshua's the only one who dressed appropriately for this interview.
Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, what was the process you had to go through?
So the whole process, in terms of Columbia River, because it's an anatomically male facility and there is anatomically female instructors coming into the prison, you have to request admission to the class, and it has to go through an approval process by different people in the institution staff. And once it's approved, then you're placed on what's called a call-out list, and they're listed on the unit every day, what kind of like appointments that you have to go to. And so if you see your name on that list for Living Yoga on Monday nights, that means you've been accepted into that class and have, completed the process.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So obviously, it's okay. Obviously, Living Yoga wasn't your first exposure then to yoga.
No, Living Yoga was not my first exposure, no.
What attracted you to yoga?
I think...
As pauses for sorry, there's just going to be noise everywhere.
But,
it shows that you are not inside any longer. You're outside in the noisy world. And,
it is true.
Okay.
What was the question? I'm sorry.
What has attracted you to yoga?
Oh, so to be honest, in college, what attracted me to yoga was very attractive women that I, had other classes with, and which suggested and recommended that I do take yoga. And it was more towards like someone I find attractive wants me to go to something, so I'm probably going to go to it. But then I realized that kind of how peaceful I felt afterwards and how good my body felt, especially after, consecutive times of going. And in prison, it was like it was a desperation type of thing, because I was like, how am I going to get that? And then I found out like Living Yoga has classes on the inside. I found that out at Intake, which is at Coffee Creek Correctional Facility, which is in Wilsonville. It's a women's facility, the only one in the state, but it also has intake for anatomical males as well. And I was told there that that's a place that offers yoga, and since I'm supposed to be going into minimum custody, that I'd be eligible for it if I went there. And so I asked them specifically to kind of allow me to go to Columbia River. You talk to what's like a counselor when you're at Coffee Creek, and they determine where you're placed. And I specifically requested Columbia River due to yoga. I said it would be of great benefit, especially because I had almost 4 years, or more than 4 years to do still. And I knew that I wouldn't be mentally as productive and at peace if I didn't have it. So I had to specifically request that.
How often were you allowed to take the yoga classes, or how many times a month were you able to take a class?
So at Columbia River, there's 3 classes a week, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. And I just did the Monday evenings for many reasons. The other instructors, Tuesday mornings was actually too early for me. I'm not a morning person whatsoever. And Wednesday afternoons, I always wanted to go to yard and work out. It was like at 2 p.m. And even if I didn't go outside, there was usually a class I was doing or something I was facilitating or an event I was planning or something that inhibited that. So Monday evenings tended to work out better for me. So I would do every single week basically from April of 15 until I was released November of 18.
So not knowing what it's like living in a facility like that, and hearing some stories from yesterday, can you speak to like how noisy it is living there? Or maybe it's not as noisy as I'm assuming, but it sounded like it. Like when people go to living yoga classes, it's like the 1 hour maybe of quiet time that they can just be in their heads for a bit.
Yeah, I mean, at Columbia River, there's dorms. There's 6 dorms of 80 people each, and then there's 2 program units, which I believe have 50 to 60 people. They have fluctuated even from the time I was there. But when you're in a unit, it's just blocks of beds going down probably 100, 200 feet or so, just, bunk beds. And so it's incredibly noisy, depending on the time of day, though. So, like, there's yard line movements at Columbia River, which is a minimum. But line movements are supposed to be for mediums, but for some reason Columbia River still has them. But when, like, the first yard line at 115, for example, is called, it tends to get really quiet because everyone just wants to go outside for a little bit. And you're left with probably 10 people out of 80 in a unit on average, depending on the unit, obviously. And so it just fluctuates throughout the day. And at night, there's actually a very specific, like, untalked about policy of, like, you're going to be quiet. And it's the threat of violence. Like, you don't want to wake people up. You don't want to infringe on whatever autonomy we have left, and people need to sleep. And so that's kind of an unspoken rule that we always know is, like, after, like, 10 o'clock, if you're keeping people up, you might get harmed. So you try to go to sleep, for your own benefit.
Right. So do you have any time to practice yoga outside of that class?
You do. I didn't personally. You could do it at yard. Mm-hmm. Just most people don't. There's still a strange stigma in prisons. It's a very, like, the mindset is going back to the 1970s, 1950s, for example. In some capacity, like, it's still looked down upon. It's still open behind me.
Yeah. Oh, the window's open?
I got it. Continue?
Yes, please. So you said it's
in some capacity, like, it's kind of looked down upon to be practicing yoga as an anatomical male, which is strange to me, but again, that's kind of been ingrained in our society a little bit by masculinity, especially the toxic version of it, is that you're deemed girly or something, which for some reason is also a negative to them. And so people don't really do it because you kind of get picked on, you kind of get made fun of, even if you're at the level I was at where I could say, like, no, like, this is what I do for myself and this is, how I stay okay. You'd still be, like, have to endure little pokes and jabs about it. So I just stick to the class. And that's also what I think allows it to be so, like, needed in that environment, because when you do go to the chapel, you're away from your unit, you're away from the yard, and you can just, like, practice in peace, and there's none of that going on. So I think that's what makes it so beneficial as well for other people.
Because there's a sense of, I don't know, kind of keeping it to yourself in a way in that class? Do you sort of form your own sort of community with those people in that class?
Yeah, of course. It's like safety and comfort. I mean, sometimes we still don't like each other when we leave the room, but when we are there, a lot of the prison politics and different things that we have to abide by outside of the room doesn't really apply. And so it's a brief reprieve from all of that, you know, every week.
That's great. I'm going to have you just phrase it just ever so slightly to say when me and the other class members are in the living yoga room, even though we might leave not necessarily liking each other, it's a reprieve. Because I'm just missing that little quote, so I can thread it together in the edit. Sorry.
Oh, so it would be helpful in the edit to have, that was a really awesome idea. That idea that like...
What you said was totally great.
Yoga may not solve the world's problems, but at least while we are in that space, we can kind of leave that behind.
So I think one of the things that makes it so powerful is that you can temporarily not abide by the things that you have to in a prison setting. Things that we... I don't know how to explain it. Hold on, let me try.
No worries, take your time.
I felt I did. I said it well.
You said it really well. Don't worry about it. We'll find a way to stitch it together. I don't want to make you have to go back to that.
I'm trying to like lessen what I said and then
like maybe 2 words at the beginning that would make it complete.
Right.
Sentence.
What we'll do, and that's what the magic is of editing, is that you probably said it someplace else, and we'll be able to cut between the
Absolutely.
It'll be like, there it is! Yeah. You said it! Okay, can you maybe talk about an impactful moment that you experienced during a living yoga class? Whether it was like, help me relive something that, you know, came up from your past, or just you felt, I don't know, I'm not going to put words in your mouth, but was there a moment like that?
The only like personal impactful moment that I experienced was completely negative, and that was due to staff. Not volunteers from Living Yoga. It was due to a correctional officer. And they call over the loudspeaker Living Yoga, you know, Monday nights when the volunteer shows up. And so people are aware that they can now go down to the chapel. The last year and a half I was in prison, I was kind of in charge of a lot of different things, like setting up classes before people got there, so we didn't have to, you know, rush and try to make everything comfortable for the volunteer or the other people attending the class. And I used to just go down to the chapel to make sure everything was set up. There's people in charge of that on the inside, but I don't know, maybe for peace of mind, I guess I'd go down to make sure everything was all good, you know, maybe if they needed help or something of that nature. And so I did that one of the times. I think it was like, I don't remember the exact date, but it was, I'd already been in the class for well over 2 years. And I went down and I was leaving the chapel area, and it was called over the loudspeaker, and a correctional officer came from the program units, which are right directly next to the chapel area, and are in charge of that area. And she came out and within probably less than that, probably 3 feet of my face, screamed at me that I wasn't supposed to be in that area. And like, including while the volunteer from Living Yoga came and witnessed that. And other people from the class were also, you know, lining up in that area to go into the chapel for the class while I was being screamed at. And so that was a very strange and impactful thing that, you know, being in the wrong area, I guess, would be their argument of why that happened. But it was such a stark difference and a very strict barrier that is set. Like, once you go in the chapel, you're okay to do yoga, but if you're outside the chapel, you're still in prison. And that's not logically how it is, because it's all prison, but that's how it felt. There was this giant, you know, painful barrier. And if I'm on the wrong side of it, that's what's going to happen. So that was the most impactful thing that I remember.
Almost like once you cross that threshold, you feel this sort of sanctuary.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I feel a sanctuary in that place quite a bit once you cross the door. Which is what chapels are for anyway.
Yes, absolutely. were you able to go into class after that and able to somehow find a release?
So at this point, I had attained enough status where I could voice concerns to staff personally, as well as people that were, I don't know how to explain it, like loyal to me, in a way that would be addressed to that specific staff person, and it wouldn't happen again, and it didn't. And so I did that for probably 30, 40 minutes because I was also like trying to decompress and get in the right mindset to even be able to sustain a practice. And so once that was complete, then I was able to go back down to the chapel and, you know, do about an hour or so, 45 minutes of yoga. So, yeah, it just took some time.
Was anything that you have practiced with yoga able to help you in that moment, too, to be not just, like, go off?
Of course. I mean, the whole barrier thing is, like, once I can get past that door, and I can just kind of let go of this and start the breathing and start the poses, and I'll be all right. You know, I had to get to that place first, but that was always the goal. I was like, I need to get there because that's what that will offer me is just peace and calm and comfort.
Thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
So I guess it kind of rolls into, you know, the other skills and tools that you learned through your practice over the years that now you've incorporated internally, not just like when I'm in this room I'm able to do it, but you've taken into your life.
Yeah, what I've incorporated in terms of the practice of yoga and how it's kind of elevated my life in general and how I show up in the world is that I was never really able to meditate before that, before I started practicing yoga, but for some reason when I get into the flow, especially, you know, just vinyasa and different things, that type of flow, I'm able to be clear in my mind, and I just don't, nothing that is weighing on me is there temporarily. All I think about is my breath and just the ambience of the room, the aesthetics and different things. And it's a very, almost like being in this field and there's just wind and there's just like, that's all there is. And you can just look out for miles and, you know, you're safe and comfortable. And that has been able to like show up in my body in working out in general after I started doing yoga. It didn't before that. I also did a lot of sports growing up, baseball and things like that, that I never had that before. But once I started practicing yoga, especially living yoga in particular in prison, when I was working out, I started to get that same feeling where I was just calm and safe and comfortable, and I could like almost meditate and have a clear mind.
That's wonderful. Wish I could get like that.
I know, right?
And I guess, what has your experience been since being released now with yoga or with living yoga?
Since I've been released, my experience with living yoga in particular, I tried to do kaleidoscope yoga with a friend, and it was all right. Like, it was a good introduction to being touched again, because it incorporates not a partner yoga, but it's almost a communal yoga.
Can you explain what kaleidoscope yoga is?
I can't.
Okay.
But
do I have to join a club?
The instructor is good. It's kind of like partner yoga, but with a group of people. Is the best way I can describe it. And I was introduced to that by a friend once I got out, and I was like, that's cool, but it didn't emphasize any of the actual yoga stuff. It was more about just touching together and kind of posing every once in a while. So I was like, I mean, that's cool. But then, you know, I found out that like living yoga has volunteer trainings and other things coming up, and I knew I couldn't afford it. So I emailed them and I was like, hey, is there a way that I could kind of get this covered or something of that nature? And they're like, yeah, since you took it in, you know, on the inside, you're eligible for like a scholarship, a grant that just paid for the training. And so I was like, if you're going to pay for it, I'm going to do it. So that's what I did. And, the training was actually really, really cool. It was over 2 days, 3 days. I think it was 2 days, just a weekend. And it was like even a break from the world, but in a good way, not like a prison break from the world, like you're separated and isolated and stuff. It was like you're separated and isolated and you're healing and you're recovering and you're learning together. And the training in general was really beneficial. And then I realized that I have so much going on with various nonprofits that I started in prison, as well as work that I've done on the outside, public speaking, for example, that I don't have much time to be a volunteer instructor. But I thought of what else I could offer, and it's, expertise and story and experience on the prison aspect of living yoga and what it does, how it feels, how I can possibly make that experience better for the people that are still inside, different things of that nature. So got more involved with Avery about that, who's, I don't know how to...
Amazing, yes we know.
Right, but like, I don't know if you want me to explain like her title and all that other stuff, because I don't know it. But,
Okay.
but yeah, and so I got more involved in that aspect since, and the one thing I really want to do is to go back into prison to teach it, but I'm not allowed to because I was released from prison for a certain period of time. It's 5 years according to the Dome building at Salem, which runs the Oregon Department of Corrections, but I can get that waived depending on certain things. But I've also only been out 10 months. Usually the waiver at minimum is like you can go back after a year. So I'm trying to discuss things like that because I do think that I would be able to resonate and relate more to people in prison than the other aspects that Living Yoga does. For example, they work a lot with people in recovery or struggling with addiction. And I'm straight edge and have been my whole life. I've never been drunk or buzzed or high. And so I wouldn't be able to kind of understand or relate, and people could see that. Like it's very evident if someone doesn't have that and doesn't know what you're talking about and can't, relate to you on that level. And so I think that my instruction in that regard would be more negative than positive. It wouldn't be beneficial to them. It would just be like them doing what I say, and that's not what Living Yoga is about. It's together. So yeah, I'm just trying to figure out how I fit into giving back to what gave me peace.
Well, what have you been doing with your public speaking? I mean, can you explain what Living Yoga meant to you while you were in prison? Can you sum that up briefly for us? How important that class was to you?
Like I said, it was the one time where everything that we had to be and say we were was allowed to be let go. Everything that that we had to do to stay, on the good side of other people's opinion in that environment was let go for the most part. There wasn't correctional officers in the room usually. It was very rare that they actually stepped inside the chapel where it was held. And almost every single class I went to, I had someone that I considered a friend in there with me, at least one, usually 2 or 3. And it was just the one time I felt human, one of the very few times that everything that they tell you you are, and they try to make you remain, just kind of didn't exist. Like I said, it was a brief ceasefire in the violence that is prison.
May I ask a question?
Yeah.
No?
Oh, no. Well, I have a question for you, but I'll have to actually, in order to preserve continuity, I'm going to stand over here so that you can keep answering questions in the same direction. But first off, it is awesome to hear your answers because I don't meet very many people that have such a really strong ability to talk about their understanding of who they are and how the world, how they relate to the world around them. Mm-hmm. And you have a really strong gift for actually clearing away some of the stuff that we take for granted and thinking about that. And so I suspect that you probably would find your way in a good direction if living yoga were not available to you. You seem like you have a pretty good ability to find your way and navigate things. But I'm really curious to know, like, if living yoga hadn't been offered for you while you were incarcerated, what do you think might have happened? What would be the alternative for you at that point?
So if living yoga hadn't existed in prison, I think that I would have probably started to establish a practice by myself and gotten to a point where I had groups of people doing it with me. But I also think that I would have got more heavily invested in starting classes, which I did, and also educating myself, reading a lot more, writing a lot more than I did, and I wrote a lot. And just focusing more on my mind, because I think that would be the only thing that I had left, since the physicality that I need that comes with yoga would, be either hard to come by or just non-existent. So I think that I might be more intelligent, but I also, my body would have suffered quite a bit more. You're welcome.
Go back to my one over here.
Oh, I did. I could have just stared at her and answered your question, though, too.
I know, but like,
sorry, I just wanted to be creepily lurking in the shadows.
Let me pretend the jeans on my mannequin. Do you feel that as you have practiced mindfulness and yoga, your perspective has shifted at all or influenced how you view yourself or others?
I think that the mindfulness aspect of yoga has benefited me, not in terms of how I look at myself, because I think that I've always thought of myself as great, and I have some problems ego-wise with that. However, I do think that letting go of other people's opinions on me has been of service in terms of using yoga for that. Using that mindfulness side of it is just that nothing's really personal. They're just on their own journey. They're trying to figure stuff out themselves. It's not what they're saying to me is from something that they're undergoing. It's not, my fault or my problem to deal with. So any type of negativity that was, that tried to come my way, I guess, didn't have as much effect, which is also very good for that that realm of society, that prison, is that there is a lot of negativity because we're all suffering together by a common oppressor. And what usually happens is we take it out on each other, the same way if there's a bully at school, he's probably getting harmed at home. Healed and complete and full people don't go around hurting others because they don't have any problems. They're happy. They're at peace. And that type of thing, that reminder every week, I guess, helped a lot in that regard, is that anytime someone was harmed or tried to harm me, for example, I tried to understand where that was coming from and if there was anything I could do to prevent or stop that, rather than blaming them or saying, that it's my fault, because it wasn't, and it wasn't theirs either, really.
It sounds like you were able to set up your own boundaries, but not taking in someone else's anger and violence too personally, at least.
Yeah, it was very autonomous in a place where you have none.
Yeah. Was there a particular pose or part of yoga that you loved,
Yeah.
Was it the breathing or a certain stance?
So my favorite pose that I always did every single class for almost 4 years straight is a corkscrew shoulder stand, which none of the instructors ever offered, but I always did personally because, first of all, it looked cool. Secondly, it felt good. And third, I think it might have been OCD, like I need to do this before the end of class, but I always did a corkscrew shoulder stand it's hard to
We're
describe.
gonna get a picture of that
Absolutely.
at some point. Yeah.
Absolutely. I would love to.
We're gonna have to now.
Yeah.
We're all like, what's that?
Yeah. And yeah, it's most instructors don't offer it. Most instructors have no idea what it is.
Most instructors can't do it.
Most instructors cannot do it. So it was always kind of a way to show off as well as feel good and, close out my practice.
Sounds like a capper to the day.
Yeah, yeah. And everyone was tired and everything.
What would you say to someone who was thinking about taking a living yoga class? How would you invite them or convince them to join you?
I would say that if you have anything that you struggle with in your mind, and if your body just aches, that this will help you. This will heal you. This will recover what needs to be recovered. And, I can go there with you. I can come with you if you don't feel safe, if you don't feel comfortable, if you think it's weird. I can come with you and show you how it is.
What is it about the class that makes it so unique compared to other yoga classes?
The instructors, the time of day, that's what makes it so unique to other yoga classes. There are 2 others, like I mentioned, but I think that because it's in the evening, it's 7:30 at night to 9 p.m., and there is a gift that is given when somebody that we don't look like or somebody that has the body of someone we're attracted to in a place where you are refused that, healthy sexuality, any type of, even speaking to a member of somebody that you identify with or you're attracted to is kind of not allowed. And so even in a healthy manner, we're not able to simply have a discussion with somebody that doesn't look like us. And there's a great benefit to that in that place where we spend years not speaking to those people. And then they expect us to have healthy relationships when we get out, when they ban that type of interaction. So how could we ever figure out what a healthy relationship is if we can't even speak to someone? And so I think that base level of having anatomically female instructors come in a facility that is anatomically male serves a very unique purpose that is not, and don't try to distort it because a lot of people in America will, it's not really about sexuality, it's about healthy interactions with each other and learning how to do that and being safe and comfortable in doing that.
I get what you mean, trying not to segregate societies too much.
Yeah.
One last question I don't think I have touched on is the bridge from leaving and was trying to get to the point. Was living yoga a bridge for you since you were doing it before and now you're out? What's going on? How do I, act in the society now? Did they help you when you got out?
They didn't. Living yoga didn't help me when I got out. I requested, more of their help than they offered, but that is because of the rules regarding volunteers in prison and classes that do go into Columbia River, is that there is an invisible barrier after you get out, that you are not supposed to interact with volunteers that you've met while in prison. And so the only thing I actually could do legally in their rules, even though it's not a crime, it's not a law that says you can't do this, but it might infringe or get living yoga in trouble, which obviously that would never be my intention. So I had to actually just go to their website, look things up myself, and ask if there was something I could be involved in or something I could do, if they could help with that. So it was, that bridge is there now, but you have to create it and you have to make it personally. And that's true of most classes, and that's also why a lot of people struggle getting out, because you get out to nothing. Most people, almost everybody does. Maybe a friend or two, maybe a car, some clothes sometimes, but that network that you had, especially if you did every class like I did, if you started classes like I did, which is also very rare, they tell you you can't continue that which it doesn't make any logical sense, but that is the rule. So that bridge constantly has to be created. On the inside, too, you have to choose to go to these classes. You have to apply. You have to send kites, which are little inmate communications that we do, and, prisoner to staff, to even be eligible to go and attend things. You can't just show up. And so you constantly have to make a way for yourself, and you have to find that there is. A lot of people spend months in prison not knowing that there are classes, because it's hard to see them advertised. And a lot of people, if you're not, in their face talking about something, they just sit on their bed and, spend what time they have. So you have to actively seek and also network. Like I used to tell people about classes, like you can take this class, it's on Mondays, it's on Tuesdays, it's on Wednesday. So people were aware that there's other things you could be doing, that'll help, that'll benefit, that'll, get you out of this place for a little bit. So
once you were able to reach out to them through the correct channels, what were they able to do? What were they able to provide for you, I guess?
The other prisoners or living yoga? After I got out?
Yes, when you reached out to them about wanting to be involved in the programs.
What they were able to offer after I got out, like I mentioned, is basically the scholarship to attend the training. And after that, just a continuation of some semblance of community that I had. A lot of the people, instructors that I met on the inside, I've met one after that. Well, two technically, but she's a unique person that kind of set up a lot of my public speaking as well. Professor at Lewis and Clark College. And so those two are basically the only people that I've continued some semblance of conversation with, but other people that are in the living yoga domain, I've become close with since completing the training. And so that has offered a kind of similar interaction as the peaceful chapel area, but in the outside world. We had a kind of a barbecue thing, little picnic in the park a week ago, and it felt like that. Like there's just a little bubble of comfort and safety in the middle of the city, and so it felt similar.
Awesome. All right, one last question. If you had to describe living yoga in 2 words tops, how would you describe it?
Oh goodness, hold on. I'm not good with small answers. How I would describe living yoga in 1 word is resolution, I think. Resolves a lot of things that you place on yourself and other people place upon you, and kind of frees you from those binds in a way that not many groups or any groups really can offer, I don't think.
It's beautiful.
I know, right?
Oh, ego. Thank you very much. That was wonderful. Is there anything that else you want to say about yoga, about yourself that we might have missed?
I could write a book about myself, but no, ain't nobody got time for that. I appreciate it though. That's all.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So many gems.
Should we do